In the heart of West Africa, where power often changes hands not with votes but with rifles, and where loyalty can be bought, broken, or betrayed overnight, something is stirring. There are places where silence means safety, and then there are times when silence is the sound of something terrifying approaching. This is one of those times. Burkina Faso, October 2024. A man steps up to a podium. He's young, barely in his mid-30s, dressed not in the tailored suits of the political elite, but in camouflage, combat fatigues, the kind that doesn't pretend to be diplomatic. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, the military captain who seized power in a coup of his own just 2 years earlier. Since then, he's become many things to many people. To some, a liberator. To others, a dangerous populist. But on this day, he is something else. He is a messenger. He looks straight into the lens, unwavering, calm, and delivers words that resonate across borders, like the tremors that come before an earthquake. There are countries that still walk hand in hand with their former colonizers, he says. They serve empires they do not understand yet, but soon they will. Because the fire that is coming will not stop at our borders. No country is named, no military action is declared, but the meaning is unmistakable. This is not diplomacy. This is not metaphor. This is a warning. And in the weeks that followed, something strange began to happen. The name Côte d'Ivoire started showing up in tweets, in Telegram channels, on encrypted WhatsApp threads passed between journalists and soldiers and activists. Whispers, unconfirmed, unproven, but persistent. Something was happening. Military vehicles seen in odd places, senior officers suddenly silent, social media accounts deleted without explanation, anonymous claims of restricted movement in military districts, state television broadcasts delayed, glitching, repeating older clips, and yet the government said nothing, not a word. No denial, no confirmation, only silence. And in that silence, the question grew louder. Did Ibrahim Traoré just predict a coup in Côte d'Ivoire? Or worse, did he trigger it? This is not a question of speculation. This is a question of timing, pattern, geopolitical rhythm. Because what Traoré said did not emerge from a vacuum. It came at a time when West Africa is shifting violently, decisively, away from decades of neo-colonial allegiance to France. One by one, former allies of Paris have fallen. In 2020, Mali. In 2021, Guinea. In 2022, Burkina Faso. In 2023, Niger. 4 countries, 4 coups, each one fueled by resentment, sovereignty, and the rejection of foreign control. And now, 2024 is drawing to a close, and Côte d'Ivoire, long viewed as the last pillar of French influence in the region, is feeling the heat. For years, Côte d'Ivoire's president Alassane Ouattara maintained tight alignment with French interests. He built his legacy on economic growth, political stability, and regional diplomacy. But beneath that polished surface, unrest simmers. The youth are restless, the opposition is fractured, and yet increasingly vocal. Security forces have grown more visible in urban centers, and Traoré's words, spoken hundreds of miles away, landed in Abidjan like a stone thrown into still water. The fire is coming. Those were his words. But what fire? From whom? And why now? Is this merely rhetoric? A man playing to a Pan-Africanist audience? Or does Traoré know something that we don't? To understand the storm, we must first understand the man who warned us. Ibrahim Traoré did not rise through traditional ranks. He emerged in a time of chaos, when Burkina Faso was engulfed in jihadist violence, internal corruption, and foreign interference. He seized power in what many called a corrective coup, ousting a regime that had lost the trust of its own people. But he did more than just take power, he claimed a mantle. The ideological descendant of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader who once renamed the country, rejected foreign aid, and warned of the dangers of empire before being assassinated in a French-backed coup. For many, Traoré is attempting to finish what Sankara started, a revival of Pan-Africanism, a rejection of foreign domination, a call for a new, sovereign Africa. And that is dangerous. Because ideology spreads, because ideas are more contagious than violence, and because once you set fire to an old system, others may decide to light their own matches. Now think of the timing. In the days following Traoré's speech, digital networks in Côte d'Ivoire began experiencing unexplained outages. Certain journalists reported being followed. Military analysts abroad started detecting strange patterns in troop movements near Yamoussoukro. And then, nothing. No confirmation, no photographs, no statement. Just quiet. Too quiet. And if you know this region, if you know its history, then you know that silence doesn't mean peace. It means a choice is being made behind closed doors. It means something is happening. The question is, what? And the more important question is, why now? Is this just paranoia? A coincidence fueled by online rumors and regional tension? Or is this the fifth domino? Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, and now Côte d'Ivoire? If so, then Ibrahim Traoré didn't just predict the next chapter in a long history of coups. He announced it with calm, calculated precision. This is the story of a leader speaking a dangerous truth, of a nation caught between its colonial past and an uncertain future, of whispers in the barracks, encrypted messages, and the fire of rebellion quietly smoldering under a fragile peace. This is the story of Côte d'Ivoire, perhaps on the brink. This is the story of a warning delivered on camera before the world even knew what it meant. And this is the question we must confront together. Is this coincidence or prophecy? Because in this region, leaders fall overnight. Loyalty dissolves in moments. And sometimes, one man's voice can shatter the silence of an entire continent. So ask yourself, what happens when the warning becomes reality? What happens when a symbol of resistance speaks and the ground begins to shift? And what happens if the next domino is already falling? Did Ibrahim Traoré just predict a coup in Côte d'Ivoire? Or did he ignite it? The answers lie ahead, and they will not be easy, but they are necessary. Because in West Africa today, prophecy isn't found in holy books, it's found in speeches, and sometimes in silence. Before we can understand the weight of Ibrahim Traoré's warning, we must understand the man behind it. Who is he? Where did he come from? And how did a relatively unknown military officer rise almost overnight to become one of the most polarizing figures in modern African politics? To answer that, we must go back, not just to Traoré's rise, but to the roots of revolution itself. Burkina Faso, a landlocked country, often forgotten, often underestimated. But in the 1980s, it became the heartbeat of radical African transformation. Thomas Sankara, a name that still burns bright across the continent. Young, charismatic, fierce. He took power in 1983 at the age of 33, renamed the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, land of the upright people, and launched a wave of revolutionary reforms. He rejected IMF loans. He slashed the salaries of government ministers. He empowered women, vaccinated children, and planted trees to combat desertification. He stood on podiums and denounced colonialism, not just in French, but in the language of dignity. But revolution, real revolution, comes with enemies. And by 1987, Sankara was dead, shot by his former friend Blaise Compaoré in a coup many still believe was guided, whispered, supported by outside hands. Traoré was born 1 year later. He grew up in the shadow of that legacy, not just the assassination, but the absence of Sankara, the silence that followed, a silence filled with corruption, compromise, and the slow return of foreign influence. By the time Traoré joined the military, Burkina Faso had become a very different place. The revolutionary fire had dimmed, but something else had begun to burn. Anger, frustration. A new generation, disillusioned by promises made and broken, began to look back, not with nostalgia, but with urgency. They didn't just remember Sankara, they needed him, and in that hunger for sovereignty, Ibrahim Traoré emerged, not as a politician, not as a polished diplomat, but as a soldier, a captain in the artillery corps. Quiet, disciplined, sharp. He trained in Burkina Faso's military academy and later studied at the University of Ouagadougou, a rare blend of intellectual and combat readiness. But it wasn't his rank that made him dangerous, it was his timing. By 2022, Burkina Faso was on fire. Terrorist attacks were increasing. Dozens of towns had fallen under jihadist control. The government had lost its grip, not just on territory, but on trust. President Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, himself a coup leader who had promised security and reform, failed to deliver. The people were losing hope. And then, suddenly, another coup. October 2022. A group of junior officers led by Traoré staged a lightning-fast takeover. No bloodbath, no drawn-out war, just precision and purpose. Traoré didn't just seize power. He gave it meaning. He stepped forward, flanked by fellow soldiers, and told the nation that the previous regime had been compromised by external interests, by cowardice, by complicity. He wasn't there to lead forever, he said. He was there to restore dignity, to return power to the people. And for many, it felt like history repeating itself. The ghost of Sankara had returned. But this time, it was not through a speechwriter or university professor. It was through a soldier, a man with one boot in the mud of military operations and one eye on the future of Africa itself. And almost immediately, things began to change. Traoré broke ties with France's military mission in Burkina Faso. He ordered the closure of French bases. He expelled French diplomats. And perhaps most symbolically, he aligned Burkina Faso with Mali and Niger, two fellow post-coup nations pursuing their own anti-imperialist Pan-Africanist agendas. Together, they formed the Alliance of Sahel States, a regional security pact built not on the old colonial model of begging Paris for help, but on mutual defense, sovereignty, and shared struggle. This was more than politics. This was philosophy. And for the youth of West Africa, the generation that grew up watching their leaders bow to foreign powers, Traoré became something more than a president. He became a symbol. He began appearing at rallies, not behind bulletproof glass, but among crowds. No entourage, no luxury SUVs, just a soldier standing among the people, talking about dignity. He refused to wear expensive suits. He refused to bow to protocol. He gave speeches that felt like declarations of war, not on nations, but on systems. He condemned the CFA franc, the French-controlled currency still used in many West African states. He called out the hypocrisy of foreign aid. He questioned the motives behind UN peacekeeping forces. And in every word, there was a message. Africa must be free, or it will burn its chains to the ground. That kind of rhetoric does not go unnoticed. Western media began to label him radical. Regional elites called him reckless. But the streets of Ouagadougou, they called him leader. And so did youth across Mali, Niger, Guinea, Togo, Benin, even Senegal, and yes, Côte d'Ivoire. This is why his warning matters. Because when Ibrahim Traoré speaks, he is not just speaking for Burkina Faso, he is speaking to a movement. A growing, restless, angry movement that sees its enemies not just in local corruption, but in embassies, boardrooms, and barracks funded by foreign hands. And when he said, "The fire is coming," it wasn't just a metaphor, it was a signal. But signals are dangerous things, because once spoken, you can't take them back. And once heard, you can't unhear them. For decades, the leaders of Côte d'Ivoire walked a tightrope, balancing stability with submission, playing the game. French interests on one hand, domestic dissatisfaction on the other. But that balance is fragile. And in 2024, the tension has reached a new high. A new generation in Côte d'Ivoire is watching as Mali kicks out foreign troops, watching as Niger tears down old colonial agreements, watching as Burkina Faso declares a new age of Pan-Africanism, and perhaps most dangerously, they are listening to Ibrahim Traoré, because his voice carries weight not just in military terms, but in mythology. He has become the unlikely heir to a revolutionary past that was silenced too soon. And like all symbols, his power is in what people project onto him. Some see him as the savior, some see him as a spark, some see him as a threat, but none can ignore him. And that's what makes this moment so volatile, because in a region where power is brittle and legitimacy is a coin traded in the street, sometimes one man's voice is enough to shift perception, enough to shake institutions, enough to spark revolt. So who is Ibrahim Traoré? He is not just a soldier, he is not just a president, he is a mirror, reflecting the dreams, fears, and fury of a continent in transition. And the warning he gave Côte d'Ivoire, it was not just a threat. It was a mirror held up to a country that may no longer like what it sees. The real question now is not whether Traoré meant what he said. It's what will others do with what they heard. And in a land where history is written by those who seize it. The next chapter is already being drafted. In whispers, in barracks, in the minds of a generation waiting for its moment. Côte d'Ivoire. The name itself means Ivory Coast, a relic from colonial France when European merchants carved wealth from African soil and left scars in its place. But behind the beauty of that name, behind the boulevards of Abidjan, the glass towers, the beaches, lies a deep and growing fracture. And if you want to understand why Traoré's words struck such a nerve, if you want to understand why people are whispering about a coup before one has even happened, you need to look at Côte d'Ivoire not as a single country, but as the linchpin of a much larger game. Let's be clear, Côte d'Ivoire is not Burkina Faso. It is not Mali. It is not Niger. It is wealthier, more developed, more connected to the global financial system. Its capital, Abidjan, has long been considered a jewel of Francophone Africa, a place where foreign investment flows, where foreign embassies feel safe, where Western companies feel comfortable doing business. For decades, it has been the model of acceptable stability, a client state of France that plays by the rules of international finance, security cooperation, and elite diplomacy. But behind that polished image is a history soaked in conflict, trauma, and fragile compromise. Let's rewind. 2002. Civil war erupts in Côte d'Ivoire, splitting the country between the north, predominantly Muslim, historically marginalized, and the Christian-dominated south. For 5 years, the country is divided, literally, with rebels controlling the north and the government holding the south. 2010. A disputed election leads to a second crisis. Laurent Gbagbo, the incumbent, refuses to concede defeat to Alassane Ouattara, a technocrat with deep ties to international institutions and France. The standoff escalates, thousands die. Eventually, with French military backing, Gbagbo is captured and sent to the International Criminal Court. Ouattara becomes president, and stability once again is declared. But here's the problem. Stability declared is not the same as peace achieved. Under Ouattara, the economy boomed, cocoa exports soared, infrastructure projects flourished, the skyline of Abidjan transformed, but underneath the surface, fractures remained. The north-south divide never healed. The military remained splintered, full of ex-rebels and loyalists forced to coexist in uneasy silence. And in 2020, Ouattara broke a major political taboo. He ran for a third term, a move seen by many as unconstitutional, undemocratic, and dangerous. Protests erupted. Opposition parties cried foul, but the regime pushed forward. And once again, power was maintained through force, not consensus. This is the context in which Traoré's warning landed, because Côte d'Ivoire isn't just another neighbor. It is the last major French-aligned stronghold in the Sahel. It is the gateway between the increasingly defiant coup-led states of the north and the more docile Western-backed governments to the south, and to the anti-imperialist movement gathering steam across West Africa. Côte d'Ivoire is not a bystander. It is a target. Since 2020, something extraordinary has unfolded in the region. A chain of coups, each one toppling pro-French regimes, each one ushering in leaders who speak of dignity, sovereignty, and decolonization. Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger. 4 governments, swept away by their own militaries, driven by popular rage, and unified by a singular demand: France must go. And now, surrounded on nearly all sides by this rising tide, Côte d'Ivoire is isolated. Its alignment with France, once seen as a strategic asset, is increasingly viewed by its own people as a sign of betrayal, especially among the youth, especially in the north, especially in the very communities most neglected by the central government. And that brings us to the heart of the matter. Why did Traoré issue his warning to Côte d'Ivoire specifically? It wasn't random. It wasn't vague. It was surgical. Because Traoré knows what others know, but won't say. That inside Côte d'Ivoire, there is a quiet but growing crack in the loyalty of its soldiers, in the confidence of its government, in the patience of its people. There are reports, unconfirmed, of course, of certain military factions sympathetic to the Pan-Africanist cause. There are whispers that soldiers stationed in the north feel more allegiance to their Sahelian brothers than to the elite command in Abidjan. There are signals, subtle but unmistakable, that something is shifting, and Traoré's message was not just a prediction, it was a provocation, a test, a mirror, a call. The fire is coming, but fire needs fuel, and in Côte d'Ivoire, there is plenty, a divided military, an aging president, a youth population that sees no future in French allegiance, and a powerful new example just across the border, Burkina Faso under Traoré rejecting France. And surviving. Let's talk realpolitik. In international relations, perception is power. And the perception right now is this. The old order, built on colonial alliances, economic dependency, and French security guarantees, is crumbling. And the new order, built on sovereignty, nationalism, and Pan-African solidarity, is rising. If Côte d'Ivoire tips, it won't just be another coup. It will be a continental rupture. It will mean that no regime aligned with France is safe. It will mean that Traoré's movement is not isolated, but contagious. And it will mean that what we are witnessing is not a series of accidents, but a strategy. Think about it. Think of how meticulously these coups have unfolded, each one following a pattern, each one replacing pro-French leadership with Pan-Africanist rhetoric, each one celebrated, not mourned, by vast swaths of the population. And now, Traoré speaks not just to his people, but to an entire network of resistance. He uses language that is deliberate. He invokes empire, not country. He speaks of borders as illusions, and most chilling of all, he implies that those who stand in the way will burn. So when we ask why Traoré's words caused such a stir, why his speech sent tremors through intelligence agencies, foreign embassies, and presidential palaces across the region, the answer is simple. Because Côte d'Ivoire is not stable. It is suspended between a past that clings to colonial legacies and a future being written in the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, suspended between loyalty and fire. And so, when Ibrahim Traoré looks into a camera and says, "Some of our neighbors don't yet understand, but they will," he is not guessing, he is not bluffing, he is watching for the next crack, the next defection, the next act of defiance. And if that act comes from within Côte d'Ivoire, then his words won't be remembered as prophecy. They'll be remembered as permission. Every era has its speeches, words that don't just reflect the moment, but change it. Kennedy in Berlin, Mandela at Rivonia, Sankara in Addis Ababa, and now, perhaps, Traoré in Ouagadougou. But what was it exactly about this speech that sent tremors across West Africa? What did he really say? And more importantly, what did people hear? Let's return to the moment. It was a modest setting, no elaborate stage, no military parade, just a podium, a microphone, camouflage, and a man speaking with the stillness of someone who doesn't need to shout to be heard. Some of our neighbors are still under the influence of empire. That line, simple, direct, carries centuries of weight. In West Africa, empire does not refer to fairy tales. It refers to France, to 1885, the Berlin Conference, the scramble for Africa, to puppet governments, rigged elections, and extraction masked as partnership. In a single breath, Traoré summoned a ghost most leaders dare not name, the ghost of imperialism. But he didn't stop there. They don't yet understand, but they will, because fire knows no borders. Fire, a dangerous metaphor, one that evokes both destruction and purification. In traditional West African culture, fire is both feared and revered. It destroys, but it also clears the field, makes way for new life. In choosing that word, fire, Traoré wasn't just making a threat. He was implying that what is coming is inevitable, and that resistance to it is futile. Now let's look closer, line by line, phrase by phrase, because every word in that speech was calculated, like a sniper choosing his target. He spoke of sovereignty, not just as a national right, but as a moral imperative. He referenced foreign bases and theft disguised as cooperation. He spoke of African leaders who answer to other capitals, a direct jab at those still coordinating with Paris, Washington, or Brussels before addressing their own people. He never said Côte d'Ivoire, but he didn't have to, because to his audience, both domestic and across the region, the reference was obvious. Côte d'Ivoire is the embassy capital of West Africa. It houses French troops. It hosts U.S. military training programs. It is a node in the global system that Traoré now openly opposes. And here's what made the speech so unnerving. It wasn't angry. It wasn't the kind of wild, frothing rhetoric you expect from dictatorships or populist uprisings. It was controlled, philosophical, cold. He spoke as a man not asking for change, but as one who believed it had already begun. To many, that tone is even more dangerous because a man who believes history is on his side is not afraid of consequences. He's not worried about sanctions, not worried about isolation, not worried about regime change. He speaks as if he has already seen the other side of the revolution and found it worth the cost. Across the region, reactions were immediate. In Mali and Niger, crowds celebrated. Clips of the speech were blasted over speakers in city centers. In Burkina Faso, students held up signs that read, "We are ready, the fire will come." But in Côte d'Ivoire, something very different happened. Silence. No official response, no rebuttal, no mention on state television. But on the streets, in the cafes, on encrypted apps, everything changed. Suddenly, military WhatsApp groups lit up with questions. Anonymous accounts began posting encrypted audio clips, allegedly of mid-ranking officers discussing alignment. Some citizens began reposting the speech with the flag of Côte d'Ivoire dimmed in grayscale, as if mourning a future not yet lost, but already at risk. And in opposition circles, the reaction was even more electric. Several dissidents began quoting Traoré directly. "We must reject empire. Sovereignty cannot coexist with submission. Africa must reclaim its voice." It wasn't a speech, it was a spark. But here's where the danger truly begins. When a speech crosses the line from observation into incitement, when it stops being commentary and becomes code. Because in regions plagued by repression, speeches aren't just listened to, they're interpreted. People read between the lines. They assign meaning where none is explicit. They act, not because they've been told to, but because they believe they've been given permission. To understand the power of this speech, we must understand the psychology of a soldier. In many West African countries, junior officers live in limbo. They are underpaid, underappreciated, frequently deployed, politically aware. They watch as their superiors grow rich, as their governments bend to foreign donors, as their countries grow, not in dignity, but in dependency. And then they hear a man in uniform, like them, rise to the top, speak truth, hold his ground, reject the West, and survive. That man becomes a symbol, his words become scripture, and when he says the fire is coming, they listen, and some start striking matches. That is the danger of rhetoric in a fractured region. It doesn't matter whether Traoré intended to incite rebellion. What matters is that the conditions are ripe enough that his words don't need context. They just need a willing heart, an angry hand, and a tired soul. And West Africa has many of those. There is one more element to consider: timing. Because speeches of this magnitude don't happen by accident. Traoré gave this speech just days after Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger formalized their new alliance, a security and political bloc openly rejecting ECOWAS and declaring a new sovereign Sahel. He gave it after France withdrew troops from Niger under pressure, after the US announced recalibrations of its military presence in the region. He gave it in a moment of strategic momentum. And what do you do when you're winning? You press the line, you test the others. You look to the last stronghold of your opponent, and you send a message: your time is coming. Whether it was intentional or not, this speech set something into motion, not a military operation, not a coup blueprint, but an emotional architecture. It gave people language for their discontent. It gave soldiers ideological armor for disobedience. It gave the opposition a signal they've long awaited, that the tide is turning, and they're not alone. So now we must ask, what is a speech, really? Is it just words, or is it a match? Because in this region, where frustration is a currency, where silence is a form of control, and where symbolism is a weapon, sometimes one man, in one speech, can shake more pillars of power than 1,000 bullets ever could. So ask yourself again, was this a speech, or a signal, a warning, or an invitation? Because in the days that followed, the silence in Côte d'Ivoire began to crack, and from those cracks came whispers. First, it was a voice, then a silence. Now, something else. Whispers. They came quickly, quietly. A single message on Telegram, then a screenshot of a Twitter post, deleted within minutes, then another, and another. Reports began to trickle in, not from mainstream media, not from official sources, but from everywhere else, from underground blogs, from anonymous military pages, from digital activists, from the diaspora. The rumor? A coup was underway in Côte d'Ivoire. But like most things in West Africa's political undercurrent, nothing was clear, nothing confirmed, nothing denied, just fragments, signals, clues. Let's walk through what we know, not what's speculated, not what's feared, just what is observed. On the night of November 2nd, 2024, several key military checkpoints in Abidjan reportedly entered a heightened state of alert. What triggered it? No announcement was made, no terror threat cited, no scheduled training operation reported. That same evening, multiple internet users in the Côte district, home to high-level government residences and foreign embassies, reported cellular disruptions. Nothing official, just users reporting no service, no data, no explanation. Then came the photos. A convoy. Armored vehicles, headlights piercing the night, moving west from the plateau area toward the military barracks near Trikeville. At first, it could be dismissed. Routine, rotation, drills. But then, the timing. One convoy, then another, then another. By midnight, a handful of digital journalists and activists in Abidjan had already begun asking the same question. What is going on? The government said nothing. Not at 1 o'clock a.m., not at 2 o'clock, not at dawn. Nothing. No official communication, no update from the Ministry of Defense, no reassurances, no denials. And in a climate like this, silence is not neutral. Silence is a red flag, because in a region where coups are always just one decision away, information is often the first casualty. By morning, speculation had metastasized. Rumors varied, wildly. Some said Ouattara had been flown to an undisclosed location. Others claimed a group of officers were holding internal negotiations behind closed doors. Still others believed it wasn't a coup yet, but that the stage was being set, fuel depots placed under guard, telecom switches placed on standby, security personnel recalled from leave. Each of these reports? Fragmentary, no single one confirmed. But when stacked together, they paint a picture, not of a coup, but of a country holding its breath. Here's what complicates everything. Côte d'Ivoire has been here before. The country has lived through coup rumors, power struggles, street protests, silence from above. And every time, the playbook is the same. Deny, delay, distract. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's a smokescreen for something already in motion. But this time, there's a new variable. A new player, a voice, across the border that just weeks earlier said, the fire will reach them. Now the question is, did it? Let's return to the timeline. By the afternoon of November 3rd, pro-government channels on YouTube and Facebook began pushing out routine footage. President Ouattara at a development project, military leaders at a strategy conference, parliament members shaking hands. Except, all the footage was old, recycled, dated. Background details, timestamps, and weather reports made it clear this wasn't live, it wasn't even recent. It was archival camouflage, deployed to signal calm when no calm existed. Then came the social media purges. Accounts flagged as disruptive began disappearing. Small pages dedicated to military news, gone. Opposition groups suspended. Hashtags like #IvoryCrisis and Ouattara out, shadow banned. This wasn't just moderation, it was containment, an invisible algorithmic chokehold on public conversation. But the internet is not so easily silenced, and in its darker corners, the whispers continued. One anonymous source, allegedly a junior officer stationed near the capital, leaked a voice note. There are divisions, no decisions yet, but things are not normal. Everyone is waiting for orders. From where, I don't know. That single voice note, shared over 18,000 times in 2 hours, said what everyone else was thinking. Something was happening, but no one could say what. In the days that followed, no coup was confirmed. President Ouattara made a brief, heavily edited appearance on national television, flanked by generals, all nodding in silent approval. He made no mention of the rumors, no mention of the speech that preceded them. Just vague references to unity, stability, and foreign disinformation. But that appearance raised more questions than it answered. Why now? Why the show of force? Why the careful scripting? And most importantly, why wasn't he denying anything outright? When governments want to shut down rumors, they don't usually do it with old footage and ambiguous statements. They do it quickly. They do it loudly. They do it with facts. Instead, what Côte d'Ivoire's government offered was the opposite. A shadow performance. A pantomime of stability. An echo chamber where only one voice, the official one, was allowed to speak. And in doing so, they confirmed what many feared. Not that a coup had happened, but that one might already be underway, in silence. This is the new face of coups in Africa. Gone are the days of tanks in the streets and radio broadcasts announcing the people's revolution. Now, it's signal jamming, it's information control, it's digital silence, it's plausible deniability, until the last moment. Because in the 21st century, coups aren't just about taking over the palace, they're about controlling the narrative. So what do we know? No confirmed coup, no confirmed arrests, no takeover, not yet. But what do we see? Unusual troop movements, digital blackouts, recycled media, encrypted messages, and a conspicuous silence, broken only by rumor. And sometimes, rumor is all it takes. Because in a country already divided, already distrustful, already watching its neighbors fall like dominoes, a rumor is not just a possibility, it's a trigger. So now, the world waits. Diplomats hold their breath. Journalists hunt for leads, activists refresh their timelines, and somewhere, in a barracks, in a back room, in a briefing, men with power are deciding whether to preserve the illusion of peace or shatter it. And hanging over it all is the voice of one man, a soldier, a president, a symbol. They don't understand yet, but they will. Was it just a speech? To understand why Ibrahim Traoré's speech felt like a lightning strike across West Africa, to understand why one phrase, "the fire is coming," sparked fear in presidential palaces and lit hope in rebel hearts, we have to step further back, beyond Burkina Faso, beyond Côte d'Ivoire, beyond even the Sahel. We have to look at France and what it left behind. Because Traoré didn't invent this tension, he didn't create this storm, he simply spoke it out loud. Let's go back, not just decades, but centuries. 1893, Côte d'Ivoire becomes a French colony, a pawn in a much larger game. The European scramble for Africa, carved up on maps drawn in Paris and London without a single African voice at the table. Côte d'Ivoire was prized not for its people, but for its resources, its cocoa, its timber, its ports. It was ruled not with partnership, but with paternalism. And even after independence in 1960, the chains remained. Invisible, sophisticated, binding. Because colonialism didn't end, it evolved. France called it France-Afrique. A doctrine, a strategy, a system, a way of keeping its former colonies dependent, loyal, and useful without needing direct occupation. It worked through economics, through military agreements, through carefully cultivated elites. Paris would fund elections, train armies, host presidents in gilded halls, and in return, access, influence, control. For decades, it worked. From Houphouët-Boigny in Côte d'Ivoire, to Bongo in Gabon, to Déby in Chad. A network of African leaders kept in power with French backing, and in turn kept French interests protected. Military bases were maintained, trade deals signed, natural resources secured, and all of it justified under the language of stability. But here's the problem. Stability for whom? Certainly not for the people, because beneath the surface of these alliances was a different story. Suppressed dissent, electoral fraud, militarized governance, economic dependency. France was the partner, but always the senior partner. And in country after country, generation after generation, people began to see through the illusion, especially the youth, especially in the Sahel, especially those who grew up not with memories of independence, but with memories of foreign bases, corrupt leaders, and IMF austerity programs. So when Traoré speaks of empire, he's not speaking in abstract terms. He's not engaging in historical nostalgia. He is pointing to now. To the CFA franc, a currency still pegged to the euro, still guaranteed by the French treasury, still seen by many as an economic leash, to the French military presence, bases in Abidjan, Niamey, and beyond, still operating under the justification of counterterrorism, to the economic arrangements, oil, uranium, cocoa, that ensure African resources fuel European industries while African populations remain impoverished, to the cultural influence, French as the language of government, of education, of power, and to the fact that, for all the talk of independence, many African nations are still living under systems they didn't design and cannot escape. That's why Traoré's words matter, because he's not just criticizing a foreign nation, he's naming a system, and in doing so, he's doing something far more radical. He's declaring ideological war. Let's listen again to what he said. They don't yet understand. Who is they? To the trained ear, it's a triple entendre. They are the leaders still aligned with France, the citizens still unaware of their chains, the foreign powers who think the old system still holds. But they will, because fire knows no borders. This is not just a metaphor, it's a political theory. It's a rejection of containment, the idea that resistance can be quarantined. Traoré is arguing that revolution is transmissible, that sovereignty, once asserted in one nation, becomes contagious in others, and history supports him. Mali's coup inspired Guinea. Guinea's emboldened Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso's galvanized Niger. And now, eyes turn to Côte d'Ivoire. Not because it's unstable, but because it's exposed. This is why the speech shook the region, because in a geopolitical sense, Traoré wasn't just delivering a warning, he was naming a pattern, he was calling attention to the dominoes, and by doing so, he wasn't just watching history, he was shaping it. Let's talk impact. Within days of the speech, several French analysts and diplomats, speaking off the record, admitted concern. They didn't call it provocation. They called it something far more dangerous: influence. That's the word that haunts empires in decline, because empires can withstand rebellion, they can weather war. What they can't withstand is the loss of belief. Once their system stops being desired, once their promises stop being trusted, once their presence stops being seen as legitimate, it's over. And that's what Traoré is doing. He's attacking the legitimacy of the entire post-colonial order. And he's not alone. Across the Sahel, a chorus is rising. Colonial statues are being torn down. French language is being challenged in schools. Young officers are rising to power, not as technocrats, but as nationalists, as defenders of sovereignty, as enemies of empire. This isn't a political moment. It's a cultural revolt. And like all revolts, it begins with language. Words that name the pain. Words that break the illusion. Words that call others to choose sides. So when we ask why this speech matters, when we ask why Côte d'Ivoire shivered in its aftermath, we are not just asking about military logistics or political friction. We are asking about the soul of a continent, because Ibrahim Traoré didn't just say the fire is coming, he said it as someone who believes he is fanning the flames. And if he's right, if this is not just rhetoric but a realignment, then the fall of Côte d'Ivoire's current regime would not be a fluke. It would be the fulfillment of a larger strategy, a quiet revolution already underway. Not just on battlefields, but in classrooms, in barracks, in ballots, in belief. This is not about France alone. It's about systems, power, narratives, and what happens when a continent decides, together, that it no longer wishes to be ruled, even indirectly. So now, every leader who still shakes hands in Paris must ask themselves, when will the fire come for me? And when it does, Will I extinguish it, or will I be consumed? Patterns. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And if you've been watching closely, you've heard that rhythm growing louder. Not a drumbeat, not gunfire, but a slow, steady pulse. One coup, then another, 4 in 4 years. Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger. Each one dismissed at first as isolated, a reaction to jihadism, to corruption, to mismanagement. But zoom out, and a different picture begins to form. Something more than coincidence, more than chaos, a design. Let's start with Mali, 2020. Colonel Assimi Goïta leads a coup against President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta after months of protests over corruption, insecurity, and economic stagnation. France condemns the coup. ECOWAS demands a return to civilian rule. But the people celebrate. In Bamako, young men and women pour into the streets. They wave Russian flags, burn French ones, not because they love Moscow, but because they are tired of Paris. Goïta doesn't flinch. He consolidates power, expels the French military, aligns with Russia's Wagner Group, redraws the map of alliances. Then comes Guinea, 2021. Special forces under Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya remove Alpha Condé, a president who had changed the constitution to stay in power. Again, condemnation from the West. Again, celebration on the streets. Again, the same rhetoric. Sovereignty, dignity, rebirth. Doumbouya wears sunglasses, military fatigues, and carries the aura of authority. He invokes Pan-Africanism. He promises reform, and though progress is slow, the shift is unmistakable. Then Burkina Faso, 2022. Ibrahim Traoré, young, disciplined, ideological. He doesn't just seize power, he names the system. France is expelled. The people cheer, and something crystallizes. The dominoes are no longer falling. They are being pushed. Then comes Niger, 2023. President Mohamed Bazoum, widely seen as a Western ally, particularly to France and the United States, is overthrown. General Abdourahmane Tiani, head of the Presidential Guard, takes over. The US warns of regional instability. France threatens intervention. But once again, the streets of Niamey roar in approval. People pull down French flags, deface embassy walls, demand change, and as Niger closes its airspace to foreign drones, and as French troops are expelled, the message becomes undeniable. Something is shifting. Now pause. Look again. Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger. What do they share? They're not just neighboring nations, they share deep youth unemployment, long histories of French involvement, decades of electoral betrayal, unequal economic structures, fragmented militaries, and populations hungry for dignity. But they also share something else, an ideological rebirth. And it sounds like this: we are no longer colonies. We don't answer to Paris. Africa must be free. The empire must fall. What once was whispered is now declared. What once was feared is now worn like armor. This isn't just about soldiers toppling governments. It's about ideas toppling old loyalties. And in each case, the rhetoric is eerily similar. Let's compare. Goïta in Mali. We are taking our destiny back. Doumbouya in Guinea. We will no longer be prisoners of the past. Traoré in Burkina Faso. We are not slaves. We are sovereign. Tiani in Niger. The security system imposed on us has failed. These are not random expressions, they're chapters of the same manifesto, and that manifesto, it reads like a quiet revolution, one rooted not just in military ambition, but in ideological realignment. And now, Côte d'Ivoire. The outlier, the exception, the next domino. The question is not if conditions exist. They do. An aging president, a frustrated youth population, growing economic inequality, North-South divisions still unresolved, a history of civil war and foreign influence, a military with complex loyalties, and a neighboring revolution at its doorstep. Traoré didn't say this outright. He didn't name Côte d'Ivoire. But in the world of post-colonial African geopolitics, you don't need to name your targets. The people and the leaders already know. Now step back even further, zoom out. What you see is not just a regional shift, it's a continental question. Is Africa finally turning the page? Is this the end of France-Afrique? Is this the moment the post-colonial contract is finally torn up, by force if necessary? For years, Western powers believed that economic aid, military cooperation, and elite diplomacy could hold the center. But the center is no longer holding, because the people are no longer waiting. They are watching each country fall like a page from a burning book. Watching soldiers become symbols, watching old flags get folded and put away, and asking themselves, if they can do it, why not us? This is the danger of patterns. They can become blueprints. One coup normalized leads to another justified. One act of defiance echoes across borders. One voice in Ouagadougou whispers into a barracks in Abidjan, and suddenly, a question becomes a movement, a whisper becomes a roar. A country becomes a battlefield, not of guns, but of ideas. But make no mistake, this is not romantic, this is not clean, this is not painless. Coups bring chaos, transitions stall, militaries are not democracies, leaders in fatigues are not always heroes, but for many in West Africa, that uncertainty is preferable to the certainty of betrayal. Because for too long elections were rigged, for too long foreign partners protected thieves in suits, for too long peace meant silence, not justice. So now even chaos feels like clarity. That is what makes this moment so combustible. It's not just the regimes that are fragile, it's the entire structure that held them up. The diplomats, the donor conferences, the military training camps, the offshore accounts, all of it exposed, all of it questioned, all of it vulnerable. So when Traoré speaks, when he warns of fire, he is speaking as a student of history. He is naming a rhythm that began long before him. But he is also pushing it forward. He is not watching the dominoes fall. He is nudging them. And that brings us back to the question, the one we asked at the beginning. Did Ibrahim Traoré just predict a coup in Côte d'Ivoire? Or did he recognize a pattern and make sure it continued? Because when you see enough dominoes fall, you don't wonder if the next one will tip. You only wonder when. What if he was right? What if the speech wasn't just a moment of defiance? What if it was a moment of clarity? A man at a podium, not forecasting chaos, but naming it, because it had already begun. What if Ibrahim Traoré is not the fire starter? What if he is simply the man standing in the smoke, pointing toward the flames everyone else is pretending not to see? Let's entertain the possibility that this isn't instability, this is inevitable, that the West African coups, the anti-French movements, the crumbling trust in traditional democracies are not the disease, they're the symptoms, the fever breaking, the body purging something foreign. What if instead of resisting this change, we need to understand it? Because maybe what Traoré said wasn't a threat, it was a truth, and truth, in an age of empire, is the most dangerous weapon of all. Let's go deeper. Throughout history, prophecy has rarely been about seeing the future. It's about revealing what others refuse to acknowledge. Truth-tellers, seers, dissidents, they aren't inventing outcomes. They are giving voice to what everyone already feels, but fears to say. Traoré's speech did not introduce fire. It announced it. And now we must confront a deeper, harder question. What happens when a single voice pierces a lie so deeply that it shatters the silence holding a nation together? Because Côte d'Ivoire isn't just on the edge of political unrest, it's standing at the cliffside of an identity crisis, a country that calls itself independent, but whose currency, language, military alliances, and ruling class still point to Paris. A country whose people chant freedom, while their leadership negotiates contracts in French boardrooms. And when someone, anyone, calls that out, it becomes more than a political act. It becomes a revolutionary mirror. That's what Traoré's speech was, a mirror held up not just to Côte d'Ivoire, but to all of West Africa. And the reflection was uncomfortable, because it showed a region still gripped by colonial shadows, still governed by external interests, still afraid to speak plainly about power. So let's ask something radical. What if coups are not regressions? What if, in some contexts, they're the desperate actions of people who no longer believe in the promises of liberal democracy because they've never truly tasted it? In theory, democracy is choice. But in practice, in places like Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, and yes, Côte d'Ivoire, democracy became the polite veil for elite control. Elections that recycled the same faces. Parties that switched names, not policies. Institutions built to delay justice, not deliver it. So when soldiers take over, it's not always about greed. Sometimes it's about rupture, a breaking of the illusion. Now, does that mean we should celebrate coups? No. Traoré himself has warned about the perils of military rule. He has said, openly, that soldiers are not meant to govern forever, that power must return to the people. But what makes him different is this: he is not clinging to the throne. He is clinging to an idea, the idea that Africa must no longer ask for sovereignty. It must assert it, without apology, without delay, without permission. And that idea is contagious, because at the core of every post-colonial African nation lies a contradiction. They are politically independent, but economically dependent. They raise flags of freedom, while signing contracts of subservience. And deep down the people know it. They feel it when they exchange their CFA francs, printed in France, pegged to the euro, controlled by outsiders. They feel it when foreign companies extract gold, oil, cocoa, uranium, while communities remain in darkness. They feel it when their leaders are educated in Western universities, but forget their own people's history. And then a soldier steps up, young, disciplined, defiant, and says what no diplomat dares to: enough. So again we ask, was this speech dangerous? Yes. But dangerous to what? To who? To the illusion. To the system that insists everything is fine, so long as the right handshakes are made in Davos and Paris. But to the people in Ouagadougou, in Bamako, in Niamey, and perhaps even in Abidjan, it was not a threat. It was a signal that someone sees them, that someone understands their rage, that someone finally said out loud what they've been screaming into the void for decades. We are not children, we are not servants, we are sovereign. That's why this moment is so electric, so dangerous. Because we are no longer in the realm of politics. We are in the realm of belief. And belief is harder to contain than any army. You can censor a post, you can block a protest, you can jail a dissident, but you cannot kill an idea once it's believed by millions. And that's what makes Traoré's warning so powerful. It wasn't his alone. It was the voice of a region, a movement, a rising. So here's the final question in this section. It is not did he predict a coup, it is not did he incite one, it is not even did one happen. It is this: what happens when one man, with no tanks, no war, no campaign, breaks the silence of a generation? What happens when he names the fire, when he refuses to obey the rules, when he says, "We will no longer bow," and others, in other countries, in other barracks, in other parliaments, begin to nod? That's when you realize this isn't about one speech. It's about what happens when someone finally tells the truth in a room built on lies. And truth, once spoken clearly enough, cannot be unsaid. Truth has a price. It always has. And in geopolitics, when the truth threatens power, that price is almost always blood. Sometimes it's the slow bleed of isolation. Sometimes it's the cold silence of exile. And sometimes it's a bullet. If Ibrahim Traoré is, in fact, a prophet of this new era, a voice shouting sovereignty in the halls of empire, then it's worth asking, what is he risking? And perhaps more importantly, what happens to those who speak this way? History gives us the answer. Let's rewind to 1987. Thomas Sankara, the African Che Guevara, president of Burkina Faso, charismatic, revolutionary, unafraid. He nationalized land, rejected foreign aid, told the IMF to take its money and its chains elsewhere. He gave the people their pride back, and he gave France something to fear. On October 15, 1987, he was gunned down in a coup led by his closest ally, his body buried in a shallow grave, his dreams scattered, but never forgotten. Now fast forward to 2022. Ibrahim Traoré comes to power in the same country, young, military, defiant. His language, echoes of Sankara. His posture, rejection of empire. His alliances, anti-French, Pan-Africanist, popular. And just like Sankara, he has placed a target on his back. France has already pulled its diplomats from Ouagadougou. Western think tanks label his regime dangerously destabilizing. International media paints him as unpredictable, radical, a threat to regional order. Translation: he's not playing by the rules, not the written ones, the unwritten ones, the ones that say African nations must ask permission, they must accept conditional aid, they must allow partners to extract resources, maintain bases, and control currencies in exchange for stability. Traoré didn't just reject these rules, he burned them, and that has a cost. Because the machine, the one that has sustained decades of elite-managed dependency, does not take kindly to disruption. Ask Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. Ask Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. Ask Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, whose Pan-African ambitions were crushed with airstrikes and media campaigns. Ask any leader who tried to challenge the empire and build a truly independent Africa. They don't die peacefully, they are removed. Politically, economically, physically. So when Traoré stands at a podium and says the fire will come, he's not just speaking danger into the region, he is inviting danger to himself. And that's the paradox of revolutionary leadership. To speak the truth that must be said is to sign a warrant for your own downfall. And it's already begun. There are disinformation campaigns designed to discredit him, claims that he's a Russian puppet, that he's hoarding power, that his economic policies are naive. Western media often casts him as a demagogue. Foreign NGOs raise alarms about democratic backsliding. Some of these concerns, valid. Many, strategic. Because in international politics, narrative is a weapon. You don't need to assassinate a leader with bullets anymore. You can assassinate them with image. Portray them as a madman, as a dictator, as a danger to regional stability. Then justify sanctions. Then encourage internal rebellion. Then step back and let history repeat itself. And within his own country, the risks are even greater. No revolution survives without enemies inside the walls. His own military could fracture. Foreign intelligence services have long histories of supporting internal betrayal. Traoré is not invincible, he's vulnerable, because he stands between two worlds, one that wants submission and one that demands transformation. And in that space, he is exposed. This is why most leaders don't speak the way Traoré does. This is why they choose comfort over confrontation. Because to speak this way is not just to provoke others, it is to endanger yourself. And yet, he continues, knowing what happened to Sankara, knowing what happened to Lumumba, knowing that imperial powers never leave peacefully, still, he speaks. Why? Maybe it's belief. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's destiny. Or maybe he knows something we all forget. That power gained through silence is never as strong as truth spoken aloud, even if it costs you everything. And perhaps this is why his words are resonating across the continent, not because people think he's perfect, not because they expect him to save them, but because he dares to speak. In a world where leaders trade their countries for contracts, where elections are purchased, where dignity is a slogan, not a reality, a man speaking boldly, even recklessly, has power. Not because of the office he holds, but because of the truth he carries. So yes, there is a cost to defiance, and it's rising. But Traoré seems willing to pay it, and as long as he does, he will remain not just a president, but a symbol, and symbols are harder to kill. So now we ask, if speaking the truth can bring down an empire, then how far will the empire go to silence the voice? And what happens? So now we stand at the edge, not of a battlefield, not of a confirmed coup, but of something harder to define and impossible to ignore. We stand at the edge of a question that began as a whisper in Ouagadougou, echoed in the streets of Niamey, lingered in the alleys of Conakry, and now hovers, silently, tensely, over Abidjan. Did Ibrahim Traoré just predict a coup in Côte d'Ivoire? Or did he trigger it? There is no confirmed coup, no tanks in the streets, no midnight radio broadcast, no triumphant military salute from a newly anointed general. And yet, there is tension, there is fear, there is silence where there should be answers. And sometimes, the absence of proof is not the absence of truth. Because this story was never just about events. It was never about confirmation. It was about something deeper. The unspoken shift, the change in the air, the weight pressing on the region, the sound of something ancient snapping, the death of obedience, the birth of something new, something uncertain, something alive. Let's go back to the beginning. A man stood at a podium. He looked into a camera. He said, "Some of our neighbors are still under empire. They don't yet understand. But the fire is coming. And now, whether or not that fire has crossed the border, we cannot unhear what we've heard. We cannot unsee the pattern. We cannot unfeel the electricity moving through the region, because something is happening. It might not have a flag yet. It might not have a manifesto. It might not have a leader. But it is real. A continental realignment, a new African century, a collapse of colonial legacy. Call it what you will, but make no mistake, this is the end of something and the beginning of something else. For decades, West Africa has been ruled by fear and fatigue. Fear of change, fatigue from betrayal. Now that fear is shifting. It no longer belongs to the people. It belongs to those in power, to the presidents who made themselves permanent, to the corporations that wrote constitutions in exchange for access, to the governments that called exploitation cooperation. The fear has changed hands, and that is how revolutions begin. So where does Côte d'Ivoire stand in all of this? Still upright, still formally aligned with France, still governed by Alassane Ouattara, for now. But the pressure is building, whispers in the barracks, eyes in the street, questions in parliament, disillusionment in the youth. And the worst part, there is no clear answer, no simple solution, just this lingering question. What now? What happens next? If there's no coup, does the system hold, or does the silence merely grow louder until someone finally shatters it? If there is a coup, will it bring change, or just another round of promises, delays, betrayals? Maybe the real question isn't about the coup, maybe it's about what the coup would mean, because even without tanks and declarations, the idea of revolution has already crossed the border. Traoré's words traveled faster than soldiers ever could, and once ideas cross borders, they do not come back. This is where you come in. You, watching this. You listening, you thinking. You. Because this isn't just a documentary. This is a moment where you get to ask yourself, was this a warning or a trigger? Was Traoré a prophet or a provocateur? Is this a fire that must be feared, or is it the light that finally lets the region see itself clearly? In the end, only time will tell. But as we leave this story behind, for now, remember this. Truth can shake nations. One voice can echo across borders, and sometimes, the fire doesn't arrive with violence. Sometimes the fire arrives with words. Words spoken not to conquer, but to awaken. And so we leave you, not with answers, but with the question that refuses to die. Did Ibrahim Traoré just predict a coup in Côte d'Ivoire, or did he speak a truth so powerful it can no longer be ignored? Think on that. And when you're ready, share it, speak it, question everything, because history is being written now, and you are standing in the smoke of its next.